sign that he was in fact a bodhisattva. And so his heart was enshrined at a pagoda somewhere, but ultimately that pagoda was attacked and the heart was stolen. Do any of you know what happened to the heart? Has it been recovered? No, it has not been recovered. Okay. So that has disappeared, unfortunately. But there are eyewitness accounts that his heart did not in fact burn. And then ultimately what happened, you know this, the army overthrew him. He was just too out of touch with the needs of the people and too oppressive. And so he was thrown out. But this tradition of bodhisattvas certainly did not begin with Venerable Taekwondo, and it didn't end there. There's also Venerable, I can't pronounce these names, Huang. Thank you. So he, of course, passed away in 2008, and he was the patriarch of the Unified Buddhist Church of Vietnam for a number of years. He was first arrested with a group of other monks who were protesting against the communist government in 1977. He had read the letter to the Prime Minister protesting the religious oppression engaged in by the communist government. And then he was arrested several times after that, but he was ultimately put under permanent house arrest in 1982 for publicly denouncing the establishment of the government-controlled Vietnam Buddhist Church. So what the government did is they said, okay, the United Vietnamese Buddhist Church, it no longer exists. It's an illegal organization. Everyone now belongs to this, the official government Vietnam Buddhist Church. But of course, the leadership of our organization refused to disband. And they protested this, and so he was put under house arrest. And then when he died in 2008, Venerable Taekwondo, who was also by that point under house arrest, he was allowed to leave and go to the funeral. He said, "You sacrificed your own freedom in order to save our people and our faith. In return, you reap nothing but hardship, humiliation, and detention." So as I said, Venerable Taekwondo, who's the current head of our organization, he's been part of the leadership of the UBCV since the 1960s, and he's also now the patriarch of the organization. So he was part of this group that was arrested in 1977. And this was interesting. This group of monks, they were tortured, and the communists tried to get them to admit that they were actually working for the CIA. This is how diluted and twisted the communists had become. Anyone who challenged them, then they just went crazy. And they said, oh, you're working for the CIA or something. Rather than the truth, that they were working for the Vietnamese people, trying to bring freedom to Vietnam. So, of course, he was arrested several times thereafter for continuing to oppose the communist government. And then in 2001, he launched something called the Appeal for Democracy in Vietnam, and he's been under house arrest ever since at the Thanh Minh Temple in Saigon. And it's my understanding, I didn't know this at first, I've been connected with Huat Temple for a few years. I've only been living there for a year, so I'm relatively new to the traditions of Vietnamese Buddhism. But because Most Venerable Thich Vinh, who was my classmate at University of the West a couple years ago, I visited Huat several times. And I remember at Buddha's birthday celebrations, letters from, for example, Venerable Taekwondo being read. And I didn't realize this until fairly recently, though, that these letters they have to sneak these letters out. Somebody gets them and they sneak them out because it's been cut off. Excuse me there. Now there are of course many other bodhisattvas from the Vietnamese tradition whose names maybe none of us know. These are people who sacrifice themselves to the Dharma namelessly. Maybe people who disappeared and we don't know what happened to them. There are also bodhisattvas elsewhere in the world as well. I remember, and I don't remember the details of this, unfortunately I read about this a few years ago. And I thought of it today as I was thinking about my talk again. There was an she was either Irish or Irish-American. She became a nun in Japan and practiced there for a number of years. And she kept a diary. And she also was writing some letters to her teacher. And her teacher received these materials, and then he was writing notes in the margins. And at one point, seeing how profound her compassion and wisdom were after a very short time. He started saying, could she be the reincarnation of the founder, the Japanese founder of our whole tradition in Japan? This is how impressed this Japanese master was with his Western student. I can't impress upon you how important this is. This, weird foreign woman who shows up in Japan and says, I want to study Zen, and then very quickly, she got it. I remember being particularly impressed, reading some selections of her writings. I remember being particularly impressed, not just with her wisdom, but with the depth of her compassion. How much she wanted to learn the Dharma and help bring it to the Western world. Unfortunately, she passed away on her way home. She was going home to begin teaching the Dharma, and she was in Thailand, I think, and she died in a bus accident. So we'll never know what she could have accomplished. And then there was a story from just a few years ago about another American Buddhist, a young man. He was working in a donut shop or a coffee shop or something, and his coworker, this young woman, had a crazy ex-boyfriend. And so they were working together one day, and this crazy ex-boyfriend came in and he pulled out a gun. Well, this young man jumped in front of his friend and he said, run. And she ran and he got shot in the chest. This Buddhist practitioner, out of compassion for his friend, was willing, without thinking, to sacrifice his own life in order to save his friend. So, this is the lengths to which the Dharma can take us. The lengths of tremendous compassion to which the Dharma can take us. So we can see that it is possible to become a bodhisattva. Often when we think of bodhisattvas, we think of these, the great bodhisattvas, Kwanteang Bhotat, Gyatang Bhotat, all of these bodhisattvas, and they seem kind of far away, right? Out of reach, but it's not true. It is within our reach. Again, as I said at the beginning, the entire purpose of our being here in this existence is to become enlightened beings for the benefit of others. And the Buddhist path is the way to get there. So, but to be on the bodhisattva path, it doesn't mean that we have to immediately be willing to sacrifice our lives. That's something very few beings, I think, are prepared for that. It takes time to get to that point. In fact, in our day-to-day practice, we need to be careful about how much we take on. If we try to take on too much too quickly, before we've really done the inner cultivation of wisdom and compassion, then we'll just get frustrated and burned out, and then we won't be of use to anyone. So we need to push ourselves, but we also need to know our limits and be realistic. If you need rest, take rest. We can't say yes to everything that everyone wants all the time. I see American Buddhists do this a lot. They burn themselves out. And when they can't say yes to everything, they think that they're bad Buddhists. That's not the case. So definitely push yourselves in the Dharma, but know your limits and take a rest. When you rested, then you have the energy to pursue the Dharma more again as time goes forward. And then in the future, you'll be better able to benefit. We'll all be better able to benefit. So the question arises, though, particularly in relation to these three Vietnamese venerables that I just spoke about. Why did they do this? So they could have had very quiet lives and just done their own practice and stayed out of the way. But instead, they put their whole lives at risk, gave up their lives in some cases for the Dharma. And it's because they had genuinely developed within themselves wisdom and compassion. So have you all heard this term bodhicitta? Bodhicitta, we usually define that as the altruistic mind that wants enlightenment for all sentient beings. This is a technical term, and that's the definition that we usually give. It is a kind and compassionate mind that wants all beings to become enlightened. So bodhisattvas are perfect expressions of bodhicitta. But bodhicitta isn't just compassion. Part of it is compassion. We call this relative bodhicitta. So relative bodhicitta is specifically wanting other beings, seeing the suffering of other beings, and wanting them to become enlightened. So this is also the definition of compassion. Compassion is a very specific definition in Buddhism. It's really seeing the suffering of other beings and not being able to stand it. Many of you are parents, you have children. Imagine a mother with her child and seeing her child in pain. And the mother just wants to take that pain away, right? With no thought for themselves. This is what a bodhisattva is like. A bodhisattva sees the suffering of beings and has to do something about it. And so then they begin to cultivate compassion, or they continue to cultivate the compassion that they've already cultivated. And of course there are benefits to this to the individual practitioner. As motivation for us, I'm going to describe a few of these. First of all, it's an excellent motivation for Dharma practice, but as we develop compassion, we're better able to sleep and avoid bad dreams. In fact, there are psychologists now. I study psychology, by the way, at the University of the West. There are psychologists now who, as therapy for their clients who are having trouble sleeping or who are experiencing a lot of nightmares and frustrating dreams, they tell them to meditate on compassion. And this meditation on compassion seems to alleviate their sleeping troubles. So if you're having problems sleeping, start meditating on compassion. It also helps us develop patience. So when we find ourselves in frustrating situations, instead of immediately giving into anger, we're able to remain calm. Compassion helps us to remain calm. It helps us to avoid suffering, not only for ourselves, but avoid causing suffering for others. And if anger does arise, though, it goes away fairly quickly. I'll tell you a story. I teach a meditation class at UFA, and I'm 39 years old now. When I was 19 years old, I was living at home and I was in college. One of my sisters, is a year and a half older than me. And she was also living at home. We were living together with our parents and we were both studying in college. Well, one night she was watching television and I went downstairs to use the computer. And I waited till the last minute to write one of my research papers. It was due the next